And somebody's noticed that I moved my chair, and I did that for a purpose. Mr. Henderson will understand why. I guess I'm underneath Everett Dirksen, who looks a bit frazzled and upset, and that's the way he'd be today. Senator Dirksen, who led the cloture fight in 1964 to pass the Civil Rights Bill, first time a cloture vote had ever succeeded on a Civil Rights Act. He was a Republican and a Republican minority leader, and he was a sponsor, the prime sponsor of the 1965 voting rights law that passed, as did the Civil Rights Bill, with more Republican percentage votes than Democratic votes. The only no votes on those bills were the Southerners who resisted change forever. But Everett Dirksen, a great senator back in the day when Republicans were true to their original founding and had always been for civil rights. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Derrick Johnson. He's the president and CEO of the NAACP, a position he has held since October of 2017. He previously served as vice chairman of the NAACP National Board of Directors and as president of the NAACP Mississippi State Conference. Mr. Johnson received his JD from South Texas College of Law, his undergraduate school degree from Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, which I believe was also the I think Benny Thompson might have gone there, but I know Little Anderson did, a man I know in Memphis who just passed away, a fine lawyer. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Johnson, you might need to turn on your microphone.
That's important. You can hear me now.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
Thank you.
Right. Good morning, Chairman Nadler and Cohen, ranking members Jordan and Johnson, and subcommittee members. Thank you for the invitation to testify about concerted effort to disenfranchise Black Americans and the need to pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act. I ask permission to include my full statement in the record. I am proud to be with you today, representing the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization. I'm here to speak for members and activists of the NAACP across the country. I'm also speaking to you as a proud adopted son of the state of Mississippi. Mississippi has been my home for the past 30 years. I live and work in the heart of the state where so many battles for civil rights were fought. It was in Mississippi where Medgar Evers, my predecessor, served at the state conference and gave his life for the cause of voting rights. It was in Mississippi where righteous people of all races, religions, and creeds converged 58 years ago to register voters during Freedom Summer. Among them were individuals such as Hollis Watkins and Sylvester Simpson, who worked closely with Fannie Lou Hamer. It was in Mississippi where some of those heroes were summarily executed by white supremacists for the crime of registering Black voters. The sacrifice made this country a more perfect union. But the danger they struggled against never fully disappeared. Instead, it festered under the surface and is now spilling back out in a toxic soup of white supremacy. We're now facing an all-out attack on Black voters by a former president, state governors, federal and state legislators with complicity of the Supreme Court majority that has abandoned its duty to uphold the Constitution to protect Black voters' right, Black citizens' right to vote. We saw this right here in Mississippi, where NAACP documented an alarming degree of voter suppression in 2020. For example, polling places in Black neighborhoods throughout the state endured an increase in very visible police presence. Black voters were purged from voting rolls and forced to vote provisionally without any certainty that their vote would eventually be counted. Late openings, equipment problems, long lines in predominantly Black neighborhoods forced many voters to choose between their paycheck and their vote as a result of waiting an inordinate amount of time to cast their ballot. But this wasn't limited to Mississippi. This was repeated in many states across the country, North and South. As serious as these problems were, we now know that 2020 was just a dress rehearsal for the upcoming elections. The new Jim Crow generation has ramped up its efforts to suppress the political power of Black Americans to a new level with tools and tactics their predecessors could only dream of. We're looking at new lyrics, but the same old song. Even if we can find a way to overcome the obstacles they are constructing, they are creating a coordinated framework to ensure that ballots, once cast, are not counted and will not count. The Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act will go a long way towards disrupting this effort to disenfranchise Black voters. The NAACP has never backed down from working for equality and justice, and we will not back down now along with our partners. But we can't do it alone. We need Congress to join us, to hold true to your constitutional duty to protect our vote. Earlier this week, we marked Dr. King's birthday, and we watched numerous politicians quote Dr. King and embrace his life and legacy. I say to all of you that words are nice, but in the end, it is your actions that matter and that you will be remembered for. And the actions we need from you now is to stand on the right side of history and pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act. It is so important to understand that what we witnessed last night isn't the end, because the Voting Rights Act originally, it took 3 attempts to finally pass. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today, and I will be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and thank you for your work in representing NAACP and Tougaloo. Helen Butler is the Executive Director of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. In that role, she leads an advocacy organization founded by the Honorable Reverend Dr. Joseph D. Lowry, and leads initiatives that increase citizen participation in the government of their communities in areas that include education, criminal and juvenile justice reform, voter protection, and economic development. Ms. Butler, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Cohen, Vice Chair Ross, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee. I'm Helen Butler, Executive Director of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, and I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to talk about the ongoing threats to the voting rights of Georgia's Black voters and other voters of color, which deny them equal access to the ballot box and ultimately undermine democracy. The People's Agenda has always been dedicated to fighting for the voting rights of Georgia's citizens through public education, training, advocacy, and litigation. However, we are spending even more time and limited resources fighting discriminatory voting laws, policies, and procedures at the state and local levels in Georgia without the pre-clearance process of Section 5 that would have prevented many of these discriminatory voting laws and discriminatory redistricting plans from taking effect. According to the census, Georgia was one of the top 5 states gaining population in the past decade, with Black people accounting for 12.5%, the Latinx population 32%, and the AAPI population 52%. By contrast, Georgia's white population decreased by 4%. The electorate has undergone significant demographic changes, with increases in the percentage of Black Georgians and other Georgians of color registering to vote, participating in elections, and utilizing mail voting and early voting for casting their ballots in all of their elections. These changes in voting patterns have resulted in corresponding political changes, as we saw with our historic election of our first Black U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock and first Jewish Senator John Ossoff. But in response to this increasing diversity of Georgia's electorate, our majority party enacted SB 202, an Omnibus voter suppression bill, which drastically altered the process by which voters apply for and receive absentee ballots for mail-in voting. It placed new restrictions and severe penalties on public officials and nonprofit groups like mine for providing absentee ballot applications to voters who need them. It outlawed nonprofit organizations for providing just water and comfort items to voters who stood in long lines waiting to vote, at polling locations and other suppressive restrictions and penalties. At the same time, SB 202 allowed voter challenges, including partisans seeking to suppress the vote by lodging frivolous challenges, which required election officials to schedule time-consuming hearings, even while administering elections, and only giving voters 3 days notice to respond, and that notice was by mail, which oftentimes meant that they would have to leave their jobs or school commitments and not be able to attend to defend their right to vote. Just last night, the People's Agenda and other Georgia grassroots organizations were in Lincoln County, Georgia, a rural county with a large landmass, no public transportation, and approximately 6,000 registered voters for a Board of Elections meeting where the board was planning to vote on a proposal to close all 7 of the county's existing polling places and replace them with a single vote center in a gymnasium located on a 2-lane country road outside of the main downtown business and residential districts in the city of Lincoln. This proposal came on the heels of new restrictions to absentee voting in SB 202, as well as another bill signed by Governor Kemp in 2021 that reconstituted the Lincoln County Board of Elections to ensure that the majority party would have control over the appointment of a majority of the members of boards of elections. In an effort to stop this change from happening, the People's Agenda and our partners presented the Board of Elections with a petition under Georgia law, which would prohibit the county from moving forward with polling place changes if 20% of the voters in a precinct signed the petition. That petition we submitted met the threshold for 3 of the 7 precincts. During the Board of Elections meeting—
Ms. Butler, your time is up.
Oh, sorry. Okay. What I'm saying to this is that we really need the full force and the passage of the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act to ensure the protection of the right to vote for all Americans, because we stand in imminent danger of having our hard-fought rights denied in greater numbers. Please act now, like our voting rights and democracy depend upon it, because it does.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. I appreciate your testimony. Mr. Garcia was next on our agenda. Mr. Domingo Garcia, I don't believe, is he able to hear us? I think he's having technical difficulties. And so be it, he's was going to represent the United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, but he's not able to participate because of technical difficulties. So thank you for your attempt, and thank you for all the witnesses. And we'll now go under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I will begin by recognizing myself. First, I just want to put another historical footnote. Everett Dirksen, of course, behind me is an historical footnote, and a great one for this day. But the last Civil Voting Rights Act we had in 2006 was named for Fannie Lou Hamer, Mr. Johnson, for Rosa Parks, for Barbara Jordan, and Cesar Chavez, and other great civil rights leaders. A civil rights leader in our committee is Miss Lucy McBath.